Hey friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and I had a blast making this card. I'm starting off with some watercolor paper and I've spritzed it with just plain water on both sides. If you spritz your watercolor paper with a little bit of water on the back side, it actually helps reduce the curling because there'll be some moisture on the back. And I really, for how I like to play with these Lindy's Gang magical powders, I really prefer for everything to kind of stay as flat as possible because the more the paper curls, the more all of that pigment is just gonna run and like puddle up in the center. And I'm sprinkling on a lot of different colors. These are all from Nunika's journaling set. It's called Gypsy Vibes, and I think it released with Boho Dreams. But all of the colors I chose were from Gypsy Vibes. It's Vintage Caravan Caramel, Flickering Fairy Lights, Rosewood Rouge, and Smudge the Sage. So what I love is that when you hit these with some water, you can see how it blooms and how all of that dry pigment just comes to life. Now, these pigment powders, if you've never played with them before, they do have a binding agent. So that once the water hits it, it will hold it and bind it to your paper. So you don't have to worry about putting a fixative over top of this. But one of the things I do try to do with my watercolor brush is I try to dissolve any big clumps of powder. I don't want to soak this whole thing because I like having some of the watercolor paper a little bit dry because it almost, with the water tension, acts as a bit of a resist. And I just like to let it dry naturally and let it do its own thing because if I have found that if I use a heat gun and I heat it up, you get a different look because you're moving the water around, and sometimes you can create those like water rings almost where some parts of the paper will dry and it's not like a gradual, slow, organic process. And so it just sort of creates these different, it's just a different look. And sometimes I like that look better, but most of the time I like to just let it naturally dry on its own. And with watercolor paper, it'll dry completely flat. So if it did curl up a little bit, it will still dry. Now, I almost trimmed this straight, but today my video is part of an OSO inspired inspiration hop organized by Call Me Crafty Al here on YouTube. And this month we are celebrating Tracy, who is not afraid of color, on all of the socials. And I know T would not just trim this with a straight line. I'm pretty sure, I'm like 95% certain that T has the Tim Holtz decal edge trimmer. I don't have that, it's a little spendy, but I have this cheaper version that does sort of the same thing, except that it didn't actually cut all the way through. It cut mostly through, which I found was sort of good enough because it basically cut through enough so that I could tear it and have like a nice organic edge, which I kind of like. I feel like one of the things that tea inspires in me is just having a little bit of a play, stepping outside of my box, stepping outside my comfort zone, and just getting messy and not being so worried about being perfect, being straight, being, just 100% anything, just to embrace like the messiness of crafting and the exploration of crafting. And that's one of the things I love about the magicals too, because you really can't control the process of what's going to happen when that water hits the dry powder. So because watercolor paper is pretty thick and it dried fairly flat, but I'm gonna leave some heavy magnets on here so that it really dries super flat and adheres really well to my card base, which is also a nice heavyweight card base too because of the thickness of that watercolor paper. But this is the start of my card. I know that T wouldn't stop there. She would probably stamp some lovely images into this background, but I thought maybe I would do some splattering. So I've got, these are kind of like, they're coming back sort of. So they're called Splatter Effects by Spellbinders. I think Fun Stamper's Journey had them under the name Silk, I think. And I know that they were getting clearanced out, and I kept wanting to get the black one, which they've called Raven here. And I was so bummed because I guess I just waited too long, and before I knew it, they weren't available anymore. So I was so ecstatic to see that they've brought them back. So I have Raven, which is this jet black, and then I've got Sparkle, which is really cool. It's just, it's almost, it kind of looks like, you know, a big jar of Wink of Stella. So you could probably load this into a water brush and use it in the same way that you might use Wink of Stella because it's got a really lovely shimmer to it. And both of these are pretty liquidy. They splatter really nicely. And the sparkle just adds, it's like even more shimmer because I did use a shimmer powder. The magicals that I use, they are the shimmery ones. They aren't the flat magicals. And so that already had some shimmer to it and I just splattered on even more. Now, one of the things that I know T does a lot of is when she's making backgrounds, she makes a ton of them, and anything that's not her favorite, she'll just die cut out of it. And so I keep all of my oopsies, all of my backgrounds that weren't so great, my failed backgrounds is I think what T sometimes calls hers. And I die cut the shoes. This is from the Hero Arts card of the month, and it's die cut. The cool shoes are actually die cut from a failed foiling. It was a failed reverse foiling, and that often fails for me. It just depends on, you know, the foil and the papers and whatnot. And so I didn't really care too much because, you know, I was just trying to get the most out of that remnant bit of foil. But I still keep it. I keep everything, but I don't always craft with all of those failed backgrounds of mine. So I was really happy to bring out a failed background, do some die cutting out of it, and create this cool style of shoes. And I used just a black pen to kind of give a little bit of a shadow so that the legs will stand out a little bit. And I did stamp and use the coordinating die to cut out the sentiment, which is "You Go Girl." And I'm going to use that same black pen to just hand draw a little bit of a drop shadow behind this as well. I kind of like that very, like, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to have a steady hand or anything. And I kept at it. I kept adding all of these little hand-drawn marks and doodles and whatnot, which I know T is a big fan of as well. So I had a lot of fun making this card and just at every turn thinking about what T would do. If you want to see the original cards that inspired mine today, expand the description box below. There'll be a link to T's Instagram post, and as well, do check out what everybody else made and how they were inspired by T, who is Tracy Not Afraid of Color, here on YouTube and across all of the socials. Thanks again, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye.